Welcome to today's deep dive. I'm your host.
And I'm your resident history expert, ready to get into it.
Yeah, and we are getting into a really fascinating era today. I've been staring at this stack of research on the 18th century all morning, and I can't shake this one mental image.
Oh, yeah. What is
It
it?
feels like almost like a split screen effect. So on the left side of the screen, you've got the coffee shops of Paris and London. It's the Enlightenment.
Right.
People are buzzing about liberty, reason, the end of torture, the rights of man. It's very high-minded.
It's the intellectual revolution. You've got Voltaire, Rousseau, the encyclopedia.
Exactly. But then you look at the right side of the screen and you have the massive palaces of Berlin, Vienna, and St. Petersburg. You have absolutism.
Hardcore absolutism.
Right. Monarchs who believe they answer to literally no one but God. And logically, these two things, liberty and absolute control, they should be like matter and antimatter. If they touch, the whole thing should explode.
That is definitely the logical assumption. But the thing about the 18th century is they didn't explode. They actually merged.
And that fusion is the central paradox we are deep diving into for you today. The concept of enlightened absolutism,
Yes.
which, let's be honest, sounds like a marketing scam.
It really does.
I mean, it sounds like clean coal or friendly dictatorship.
It absolutely was a marketing strategy,
Okay.
but as the sources show, it was also a survival strategy. And that's really our mission for this dive. We need to figure out, were rulers like Frederick the Great or Catherine the Great actually trying to hack absolute power to make the world better?
Or did they just find a new, trendy way to justify holding on to total control?
Exactly.
Well, the sources suggest it starts with a massive rebranding effort. We're moving away from the 17th century model, like Louis XIV, the Sun King.
Right. His whole vibe was, I am the state.
My power is divine, so don't ask questions.
Divine, right.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
but by the mid-1700s, that just wasn't playing as well. The intellectual climate had shifted entirely.
You couldn't just say God sent me anymore. You needed a better reason to be in charge.
Right. So enter Frederick the Great of Prussia. He drops this famous soundbite that really defines the whole era. He doesn't call himself the Lord of the Earth. He calls himself the first servant of the state.
Which is just a brilliant piece of PR.
It really is.
It is, but let's unpack what that actually means. Because it sounds humble on the surface, but I'm reading this as a total power play.
How so?
Well, if I am the first servant, I'm not ruling you because I'm special or holy. I'm ruling you because I'm the most useful. I'm the only one competent enough to run the machine.
That's the pivot right there. It changes the justification for monarchy, from theology to utility. It's like saying, I am the CEO of this country, and without me, the stock price crashes.
And this brings us to a concept that was all over the research notes, cameralism.
Yes, you really can't understand this era without cameralism.
So to me, reading through the definitions for you all, cameralism sounded like the 18th century version of management consulting.
That is a great way to put it.
It's this German political theory that says monarchy is the best form of government, but, then it's a big feathers, but the state has a reciprocal duty to use that absolute power to improve society.
Right.
And not because they're nice, but because a better society pays more taxes.
That's the cynical but perfectly accurate take. Cameralism treated the administration of the state like a strict science.
Yeah.
It was entirely about maximizing resources. And what is a king's most valuable resource?
The people.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But not people in the democratic sense of citizens with voting rights. We're talking about people as human capital.
Taxpayers,
Yeah.
soldiers.
Yes. And this is where we have to look at the enlightened toolkit these rulers use. Things like abolishing torture or rationalizing the legal codes.
Right, let's look at torture, because on the surface, ending torture sounds like a massive humanitarian victory. Like, we shouldn't break people on the rack because it's cruel.
Yeah.
But the cameralist argument was different, wasn't it?
Completely different. The argument wasn't just that cruelty is bad. The argument was that cruelty is incredibly inefficient.
Right.
If you torture a suspect, you cripple them. They can't work in the fields. They can't serve in the army. Plus, the data you get, the confession itself, is notoriously unreliable.
So you're essentially making bad legal decisions based on bad data, and you're damaging your own workforce in the process.
Exactly. It's logic, not empathy. They wanted to rationalize the state, clean up the messy medieval legal codes that varied from town to town, standardize the entire system, and crucially introduce religious toleration.
This is the one that always surprises people when we look at this era. These monarchs weren't necessarily broad-minded liberals, But they realize that religious persecution is just terrible for the bottom line.
It's bad for business. If you kick out the Protestants or the Jews or the old believers,
You are kicking out banking networks, skilled artisans, accumulated capital.
you're voluntarily shrinking your GDP. No enlightened CEO would do that.
So the toolkit toleration, legal reform, education, it wasn't about freedom. It was about optimizing the engine of the state to run faster.
Usually so it could run faster straight into a war.
Well, speaking of war, let's look at the specific CEOs running these engines. We have 3 main case studies in our stack today. We've categorized them as the pragmatist, the intellectual, and the radical.
I like those labels.
Mhm.
Let's start with the man who coined that first servant phrase, Frederick II of Prussia, the pragmatist.
Frederick is such a fascinating character study because he really lived that duality we were talking about earlier. We call him the warrior philosopher, which sounds like a Dungeons and Dragons character class.
No, it really does. But think about it. On one hand, he plays the flute, he composes symphonies, he writes poetry, he literally invites Voltaire to come live in his palace.
And on the other hand, he starts his reign by launching a massive, totally unprovoked attack on Austria to steal the province of Silesia.
Pure land grabbing, old school aggression. That sparked the War of Austrian Succession. But the pivotal moment for his enlightenment was actually a later conflict, the 7 Years' War.
This was the moment where Prussia was almost wiped off the map. Right?
Yeah. It was an absolute existential crisis. Prussia was surrounded by France, Austria, and Russia. Frederick was fighting for his life. And the argument in the sources is that this immense pressure is what forced him to become enlightened.
He needed every ounce of efficiency just to survive.
Right. He couldn't afford a bloated, corrupt government. He needed a machine.
A machine that worked. So he modernized the bureaucracy. He created a civil service where you actually had to pass exams to get a job rather than just, being a duke's nephew.
And he called himself the first servant. And he truly acted like it. He worked insane hours.
But let's look at the limits of his enlightenment specifically regarding religion. He famously said, "In my kingdom, everyone can go to heaven in their own fashion."
A beautiful sentiment.
It is, but the reality was a bit more calculated. He kept a glass ceiling firmly in place. If you wanted the top jobs in the army or the diplomatic corps.
You still had to be Protestant.
Exactly. He tolerated Catholics and Jews because they were useful for the economy, but he didn't empower them politically.
True. He treated them like assets to be managed. Which I guess is better than being burned at the stake, but it's not exactly equality.
No, it's just pragmatism. Now, if Frederick was the pragmatist, let's move east to our intellectual case study, Catherine the Great of Russia.
Catherine feels like the one who cared the most about the actual brand of the Enlightenment. She wanted the cool kids in Paris to like her.
She really did. She was a German princess who married into the Russian line, and she was desperate to be seen as a modern Western ruler, not the queen of some barbaric backwater.
So she bought massive art collections, which eventually became the Hermitage, and she wrote letters to Diderot and Voltaire constantly.
She even bailed out Diderot's encyclopedia when he went broke to bypass French censorship, right?
She did. She wanted to be the patron saint of reason. She even drafted this massive legal proposal called the Nakaz, or Instruction. It was full of direct quotes from Montesquieu and Beccaria talking about liberty, ending torture, the rights of the accused.
But with Catherine, this is where the theory hits the hard wall of Russian reality.
The Pugachev Rebellion.
Right. This is the crucial turning point in her story.
It really is. In 1773, a Cossack named Emelian Pugachev launched a massive uprising. And this wasn't just a local bread riot. He actually claimed he was the true Tsar Peter III, Catherine's dead husband.
Wow.
And he rallied the serfs, the workers, and the minorities to basically slaughter the nobility.
That must have been terrifying for her. It's not just a protest, it's a rival claimant to the throne, leading a full-on class war.
It shook Catherine to her core. Thousands of nobles were killed. And when the army finally crushed the rebellion, the enlightened mask fell off instantly.
She realized that all this talk of liberty was dangerous.
She realized that liberty for the serfs meant the guillotine for her. So she pivoted hard. Instead of liberating the serfs, which she had genuinely talked about in her early years.
She actually tightened the laws.
Yes. She gave the nobles more control over their human property just to buy their loyalty and ensure stability.
That's the key takeaway for her segment, isn't it? The Enlightenment stops the very moment it threatens the monarch's job security.
It's easy to be a philosopher when the peasants are quiet. When they start burning manor houses, you go back to being an autocrat.
Which brings us to our third player, the one who apparently didn't get the memo about caution, Joseph II of Austria, the radical.
If Frederick was the manager and Catherine was the PR specialist, Joseph is the disruptor. He's the guy who takes over the family business and tries to change everything in the first week.
I was looking at the timeline of his decrees in the notes, and it is exhausting just reading it. He issued thousands of new laws. He didn't just tweak things, he tried to rewire the entire Habsburg Empire from the top down.
He was a true believer in the power of the state to fix society. He went after the biggest target of all the Catholic Church. And remember, this is Austria.
Yeah.
The Habsburgs were the ultimate Catholic dynasty.
But he started closing down monasteries.
Hundreds of them. He used that cameralist logic we talked about. He looked at monks praying in a contemplative order and said, they aren't running schools, they aren't running hospitals, they aren't farming, they're unproductive.
So he shut them down and seized their wealth.
Exactly.
That is aggressive efficiency. If you aren't adding to the GDP, get out.
It really is.
Yeah.
And he pushed through the edicts of toleration, which were genuinely revolutionary. He gave Jews and Protestants civil rights that were unheard of in the Habsburg lands. Freedom of the press, too.
But here's the problem, and the sources make this very clear. He didn't ask anyone if they wanted to be reformed.
No buy-in whatsoever. He ruled purely by decree. He alienated the nobility by taxing them. He alienated the church by closing those monasteries. He even alienated the peasants because he tried to change their burial customs for sanitary reasons.
Oh, right. He tried to ban coffins to save wood.
He did. He wanted them buried in sacks with quicklime to speed up decomposition.
That's wild.
It was scientifically rational, but it was culturally tone-deaf. The people absolutely hated it.
It's the classic move fast and break things failure. By the time he died, the empire was practically in open revolt. He famously asked for his epitaph to be, "Here lies Joseph II, who failed in all he undertook."
It's tragic, really. He was probably the most sincere believer in human rights among the three, but he was the worst politician. He didn't understand that you can't just force people to be enlightened against their will.
Now, we've touched on it a few times, but I want to zoom in on a specific litmus test the researchers used to grade these rulers, the treatment of the Jewish populations.
Right, the Haskalah, or the Jewish Enlightenment.
Because this is the ultimate test of their logic. If you claim to believe in reason and universal humanity, then intolerance is the most obvious contradiction. It's irrational hatred. So how did our three monarchs score on this specific test?
It's a really telling spectrum. Joseph II, despite his political failures, takes the gold medal here. He was the only one who really tried to integrate Jews as citizens.
What did that look like practically?
He issued the Edict of Tolerance in 1782. He allowed Jews to attend universities, to learn handicrafts, to join the military. He even banned the yellow badge and the humiliating dress codes that had been around for centuries.
He wanted them to be Austrians who happened to be Jewish, not a separate caste?
Correct. Then you have Frederick in the middle, silver medalist. He was a pragmatist. He gave them a high degree of freedom, but he kept that glass ceiling we mentioned.
Right.
He protected the Jewish community, but mostly the wealthy ones who could pay for protection letters. He viewed them as a fiscal resource to be squeezed.
So it was basically, you can stay as long as you pay.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And then Catherine fails the test. Badly.
Which is ironic, given her correspondence with the philosophers.
Well, Russia didn't really have a Jewish population until Catherine started conquering parts of Poland. Suddenly, she inherited hundreds of thousands of Jewish subjects, and she didn't know what to do with them. She didn't want them in Russia proper.
And this is where the Pale of Settlement comes from, right?
Yes. She essentially drew a line on the map, encompassing parts of modern-day Poland, Ukraine, and Belarus, and said, you can live here in these western borderlands, but you are legally banned from entering the Russian interior.
It was state-sponsored segregation?
It was. It created a massive ghetto that lasted until the 20th century. So for all her talk of reason, she defaulted to medieval prejudice and restriction.
It really shows that her enlightenment was only skin deep. Now, you just mentioned Russia expanding into Poland. We have to talk about where they were expanding because we can't discuss this era without the elephant in the room, or rather, the carcass in the room.
Poland, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth.
To me, this is the darkest part of the story. You have to zoom out to the map of Europe. Ever since the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, the dream of a unified Christendom was dead.
Right, the era of competitive sovereign states was born.
Exactly. So you have these three civilized powers, Prussia rising in the north, the Habsburgs shifting focus east, and Russia. They're all writing letters about justice and law, and then they look at their weaker neighbor, Poland.
And they decide to eat it.
Literally carve it up like a Thanksgiving turkey.
The partition of Poland, is the ultimate proof that geopolitics trumps philosophy. Poland was weak. It had a chaotic political system where the king had almost no power, and the nobles could veto everything. It wasn't efficient by Enlightened standards.
So they rationalized the invasion. They didn't say, we're conquering you because we want land.
No, the rhetoric was fascinating. They said, Poland is chaos. It's a source of instability. We are doing a service to Europe by stepping in and restoring order.
Wow.
They used the language of the Enlightenment order, reason, stability, to justify wiping a sovereign nation off the map.
That is genuinely chilling.
Frederick, Catherine, and Maria Theresa, that's Joseph's mother, who was still co-ruling Austria at the time. They sat down with a map and just sliced off territories. I'll take the grain fields, you take the salt mines, you take the population centers.
It fits the logic we've been tracking, though. If the goal of the state is to be a strong, efficient machine, then a weak state next door isn't a neighbor. It's just spare parts.
It's the dark side of rationalization. If you take morality out of it and just look at utility, then conquest becomes a simple math problem. Prussia needed to connect its territories. Taking Polish land solved that geometry problem. Therefore, it was the rational thing to do.
So for you listening, when we step back and look at this deep dive, what's the verdict? We started with the question, was enlightened absolutism real, or was it a scam?
I think the synthesis is it was real, but it wasn't benevolent.
It wasn't about being nice.
No. These rulers modernized their countries. They built roads, they codified laws, they improved education, they drained swamps. But they did it to strengthen the machinery of authority, not to liberate the individual. They wanted healthy, educated, tax-paying subjects who could win wars.
So it highlights this timeless political dynamic, the balance between idealism and stability. Reforms were often abandoned the moment they threatened the social order, like we saw with Catherine.
Exactly. It's the difference between a farmer taking care of his cows because he loves them as pets and a farmer taking care of his cows because he wants to sell the best milk at the market.
That is a cynical but incredibly accurate metaphor.
Yes.
Yes, they were optimizing the herd.
They were.
But here is a final provocative thought I want to leave you with to mull over. It's something that builds on all this source material. It's about the long-term impact of this first servant branding.
Go on.
By calling themselves servants of the state, these kings and queens admitted something incredibly dangerous. They admitted that the nation is something bigger, more important, and more enduring than the king.
That is a very dangerous idea for a monarch to admit.
Right, because once you separate the nation from the monarch, you open Pandora's box. If the nation is the master and the king is just the servant, eventually, the people are going to look at the monarch and ask, wait, so why do we need you specifically? Couldn't we hire a different servant?
And a few years later, the French Revolution answers that question very loudly.
Exactly.
It's the ultimate irony. They rationalized their power to save it, but in doing so, they gave the people the vocabulary to eventually destroy them. By admitting the state is bigger than the ruler, they accidentally planted the seeds of modern nationalism and democracy.
Talk about unintended consequences. They tried to hack the system and they ended up writing the code for their own obsolescence.
History has a sense of humor like that.
It really does. That's it for this deep dive into enlightened absolutism. Thanks for exploring the sources with us.
Catch you next time.